Greetings and a warm welcome to all of you to another episode of Lentswe, the voice of Transnet. This platform is dedicated to enlightening and informing you on all things related to Transnet. I'm your host, Spelele Ngqele. Now, every year in October, we celebrate Transport Month. This month seeks to emphasize the significance of the transport sector. And in line with this theme, today's episode will deep dive into the liquefied natural gas project at the ports of Richards Bay and Ngqura. To elaborate on this a bit further, we have our guest, Thandokazi Ngquma, who is the Transnet National Ports Authority Executive Manager of Utilities Development. Welcome, Thandokazi, and perhaps as a means of introduction, also tell us what you do at Transnet.
Thank you, Spelele, for that wonderful introduction. So what we do as utilities development within the Transnet stable is really embedded on the National Ports Act, Section 11 of that Act talks about TNPA being mandated to facilitate the provision of utilities such as water, electricity, and so forth. So our role is to then ensure that we have a sustainable supply of energy, water, and related services. However, what we have then done is to look at a three-pronged approach. And we primarily look at an energy pillar, we look at a water pillar, and then we also look at an alternative revenue stream aspect of it. Now, in our energy pillar or our energy strategic pillar, we look at commodities such as hydrogen. We look at commodities such as liquefied natural gas, and which we'll talk to quite soon. We look at biofuels and any related oil and gas commodities. And there it is both looking at opportunities to import those alternative fuels, opportunities to export, but also for our own use or domestic use as the TNPA for what we call embedded production. Then in our energy pillar again, we look at renewable energy. Within renewable energy, we're looking at deploying renewable energy sources across the port system. And that is looking at solar, we're looking at wind, we're looking at microgrids, we're also looking at battery energy storage systems. Now, in our alternative revenue stream, which is what we call non-tariff revenue, we are looking at how to make money or to commercialize the output of those other pillars. And then we have a water pillar. Under the water pillar, we're looking at deploying desalination plants across the port system. And this is all embedded on the sustainability imperative. The fact that we have energy challenges in the country, the fact that we've got water challenges in the country, and the ports are then mandated to find sustainable solutions. And so primarily that's what we do, looking at project development, making sure there's infrastructure, both for the port system, but also the country to bring in alternative energy and water sources. Thank you.
Thank you for that comprehensive overview, Tando. I think the audience has a greater appreciation of what utilities development does within Transnet. Now, perhaps as we zone into the energy sector, can we talk about LNG? And have you tell us why it's so important for the ports within South Africa? Why is TNPA introducing LNG import terminals? And which ports are involved in the initiative?
Thank you, Spelele, for that. So if we look at the international landscape, there is a global move of an energy transition. Now, South Africa has termed this together with the global community as the just energy transition. And it is really embedded on the fact that your fossil fuels, primarily a lot of reliance has been on coal generated electricity. Now, about 95% of our electricity is from produced from coal, and about 5% from nuclear. So, and that has had a very negative impact on our environment. And of course, that then influences how the capital markets invest in a country. Because, of course, when you have a lot of carbon emitting fuels, that then impacts the sustainability or longevity of your infrastructure. So then there is a global move and into cleaner fuels for sustainability. The second aspect of it is that really we are trying to, the country and the global world is looking at what we call an energy trilemma. Now, an energy trilemma is basically looking at energy affordability. What is the cost of electricity or energy or fuel, and how can it be affordable? The second one is around energy security. Do we have enough power for a growing community? The third one is around energy sustainability. Is it clean enough? Is it not harming our environment? Does it allow for a long-term sustainable infrastructure? So those three elements need to be looked at. And because we have experience of tariffs, electricity tariffs that has been rising over the years, and that then necessitated to look at cheaper energy sources, cleaner energy sources to deal with the environmental issues. And of course, looking at additional electricity capacity. That means looking at other sources because your coal reserves are depleting. So what other sources of electricity or energy can we look at? So really that was what motivated the global community and the country on this. And of course, because we are a developing country, South Africa, we need to borrow from the capital markets. Now, the capital markets measure your ESG, environmental, social, and governance scores as an entity and also as a country. And it then determines a premium, or rather an interest rate, of how much it can give you and whether it should give you based on your environmental impact. So that then necessitated the transition towards cleaner fuels. And lastly, the sustainable development goals do require that we must look at alternative sustainable fuels. And of course, from a port context or a maritime context, we're looking at the International Maritime Organization's net zero target, net zero emissions target by 2050, moving into cleaner fuels. And now, why am I really stressing the aspect of cleaner fuels? It is just because liquefied natural gas is a cleaner fossil fuel to coal. It emits between 40 to 60% less of carbon emissions than your coal. It then makes it also quite cheaper than your coal. If you translate it, it will then be quite cheaper to your coal. So it then fits into the just energy transition because it still can offer sustainable long-term energy solution. It then assists the country to bring in more capacity, and then it also deals with the issue of affordability. And I think one of the things we need to look at, colleagues, is the fact that bringing in liquefied natural gas will then assist the country to bring in new electricity capacity. And of course, the Integrated Resource Plan of South Africa had targeted that by 2019, South Africa would have brought in or introduced additional capacity of 3,000 megawatts of electricity from LNG as a source of that electricity generation. We're looking at also our own utility service provider in the country, our own systems operator, which is Eskom, which is also looking at bringing 3,000 megawatts of additional electricity capacity to the country. We look, so that's primarily, or that's translated into 6,000 megawatts additional capacity, which then really deals with the energy security aspect of it. So it was very important for the ports to play this role, because the country itself requires gas, liquefied natural gas, for that to be realized. And because we don't have as yet projects that have matured to look at domestic exploration of natural gas, we therefore have to look at importing this liquefied natural gas. Therefore, the ports needed to be quite proactive to put up infrastructure for importing the liquefied natural gas. So what we've then since done as the Ports Authority, we've put up a strategy of bringing in liquefied natural gas. And that looks at large scale or long-term gas terminal. And the second aspect of the strategy looks at small scale liquefied natural gas program. And I'll just touch a bit on the small to medium scale LNG program. That one really looks at bringing in liquefied natural gas without having to set up a significant infrastructure, spending a lot of money. And it's really targeted to the areas of the country where there is no existing infrastructure to pipe gas, and where you wouldn't want to do that, but to support the small scale, or rather the smaller gas to power plants that are planned, or even those that are existing that will be converted from diesel to gas, because gas is a cheaper option to diesel, even from an environmental carbon emissions perspective. So we're talking about your ports of East London for your small scale, because we are then going to be supporting the small, the power station, the Podrex, and any new power station that is going to be put up by Eskom or whoever. Then we're also looking at the Port of Mossel Bay for small scale. We're also looking at the Port of Saldanha. We're also looking at the Port of Cape Town, and we're also looking at the Port of Durban to really assist in bringing in gas much more quicker, and also in levels that would assist the smaller power stations. But in terms of the large scale gas terminals and long-term terminals, we are looking at the Port of Richards Bay, the Port of Saldanha, and the Port of Ngqura. The Port of Saldanha, it's work that is being done with the Central Energy Fund, and the project is quite in early stages. The Port of Ngqura, we are looking at a partnership with the Strategic Fuel Fund, and we'll talk about it as we proceed in the podcast. And the Port of Richards Bay, we have since gone out on the 56 and have appointed a terminal operator, and we're going to be doing that work in partnership with VOPEC and the Transnet pipelines. Now, the Port of Ngqura, we have a Section 79, which was a directive from the Minister of Transport, and it's work we're going to be doing with the Strategic Fuel Fund. Thanks.
It sounds like quite a comprehensive project. And I think in your response, you touched on quite a few key factors. One being the SDG goals around energy efficiency. And I know that those have a hard timeline of achieving energy efficiency by 2030. You also touched on being able to secure supply for communities. Now, when you look at the development of the projects, what can you tell us about the timelines for the development and operationalization of the projects?
Thank you, Spe. So, of course, we normally say the definition of energy is the ability to deliver, and timelines are of critical importance. As I have mentioned, that the integrated resource plan of the country was talking of 2027, that by 2027 we need to have a gas to power plant that is 3,000 megawatts, or a clean capacity of 3,000 megawatts from gas to power in the country. So for the Port of Richards Bay, the timelines we're looking at is to have that terminal operational and having first gas by 2027. For the Port of Ngqura, So just to bring things into context about the timelines and how do they align. Now, because the gas market is quite different to a typical commodities that we handle in our ports at the moment, it is quite different to how your liquid bulk or your container sector will work. This one is really dependent on an offtake of gas to power. So wherever you look around globally, where gas terminals have reached financial close and are able to get to a point of producing first gas, it is when there's a gas to power program of that country or a gas to power plant. That's how the numbers generally would work. So what we needed to do before were able to have confidence in the timelines and how we needed to link is to have had a lot of engagements with the market or the buyer of the gas molecule itself, because you wouldn't want to put infrastructure without having that kind of commitment or confidence. Now, there needed to be a lot of engagement with your industrial gas users. There needed to be a lot of engagement with your gas to power program leads. And the integrated resource plan, it says 2027, there must be a gas to power plant in the country. And therefore, our timelines need to match that. So hence, we're talking about for the Port of Richards Bay, a commercial operation date or at least first gas by 2027, so that a power plant is able to get the gas, or even ourselves can have a power plant that will be able to supply, where we'll be able to sell the molecules to. Now, what then happened is that the Department of Mineral Resources and Energy, through the Independent Power Producer Office, released an RFP, which then became a very good indicator that indeed there is going to be an offtake released, a request for proposals for independent power producers to set up gas to power plants in the country. And this was done last year, which was the 14th December 2023. And in that RFP, it was basically the launch of the Independent Power Producer Program, Gas to Power Producer Program of South Africa. They had trenched the 3,000 megawatts. 2,000 megawatts was what was released in December 2023. However, within that RFP, they made a determination that the remainder of the 3,000, which is 1,000 megawatts, will be in the Ngqura special economic zone, and an RFP would follow, which would be separate. 1,000 megawatts RFP would then follow after that. So the Richards Bay one was then linked to the first 2,000 megawatts. That's the timeline of 2027. Now, the Ngqura LNG terminal was then linked to the timelines of the 1,000 megawatts, which the RFP is still yet to be released, but we're working in partnership with the DMRE and the IPPO office and the Ngqura Special Economic Zone to make sure that we have the terminal and it is able to produce or give the first gas by the time that gas to power plant, which is 1,000 megawatts, is up and running at the Ngqura Special Economic Zone. So the timelines we are looking at when we've engaged with our partners for the Ngqura LNG terminal is around 2029, 2030. So those are the timelines we are looking at for first gas. So the Port of Saldanha, we're looking at quite different timelines, and the engagements are still ongoing there. But on the small scale LNG, we're looking at earlier timelines, 2026, 2027, around there. Thank you, Spare.
I think Tando, it's very clear from the media coverage that this project has received, and as well as from the advocacy it's received from TNPA leadership, that this is a groundbreaking project and it's set to be a game changer for the economic landscape, not for just the cities that are involved, but also for the country. Now, is there demand for LNG in South Africa? And perhaps to ride on that question, what are some of the strategic benefits of LNG to South Africa? And if you could take us into confidence about some of the strategic partnerships that you have had in order to realize these initiatives.
Thank you, Spe. I think just to ride on the wave of the projects themselves being game changers, or the LNG program or projects themselves being game changers, I would really also like to validate and confirm that by the fact that in March 2024, the president of the country announced these projects, particularly the Port of Richards Bay LNG terminal and the Port of Ngqura LNG terminal, as the top 12 or is being part of the top 12 presidential infrastructure projects of the country. And what that meant is that they are strategic programs or projects of the country to turn around the country from an economic perspective, that is, jobs, investment into the country, and also the energy trilemma, to deal with the energy trilemma. So they were then put in the top agenda of the country, where the country then also puts them in their own infrastructure investment book and goes around the global community to raise interest about the project and support for the projects. So I think that's one of the things I wanted to mention. But secondly to that, the projects themselves have been designated as strategic integrated projects by Infrastructure South Africa. And what that effectively means is that their timelines for execution would receive attention from relevant authorities, regulatory authorities, to really fast track them so that they come in line sooner, or even are fast tracked, of course, following the relevant governance processes. And I think the key benefits, Pelel, I think, as we have mentioned in our discussion, is around responding to the energy trilemma, affordability of energy. It can't be that as a country, we have to spend the increases of electricity prices must triple or be way above the inflation, because that then basically says businesses can't afford electricity, therefore they will close down. It simply means even our communities will struggle to access electricity because it will just be costly. If you look at the electricity price increases over the past 5 years, they've been quite higher than your inflation numbers. So really, it is meant to deal with affordability, you being able to buy electricity and still be able to live, to eat and bath and so forth. And I think the other benefit, and of course, the other benefit is around having a sustainable energy supply. And of course, in the past months, we've been talking about load shedding. And that has since been passed to what is called load reduction. So even though we haven't seen a load shedding for the past 200 days or so, but however, there is an imminent rise of load reduction. So that means you must reduce your use. Some other businesses cannot really afford reducing, because reducing simply means that I cannot run a certain operation in my firm. Therefore, I cannot deliver. Therefore, I just can't. I have to retrench people, because a certain production line can't run because I must reduce my load. So that then assists in terms of having additional supply of electricity and security, energy security. But of course, there's the element of jobs that will come in with these projects. We're looking at, for the Port of Richards Bay, about 1,000 jobs. That is including both indirect and direct jobs. And of course, the partnerships that form part of this particular project, particularly from the Port of Richards Bay. The partnership there, we're working with Vopec and Transnet Pipelines, who are the concessionaire that will help to deliver the project. Now, TNPA themselves are investing in the project, particularly on the port and common user infrastructure. Or let's rather say the port infrastructure that includes the berth itself and associated pipelines, which is about 30% of the entire investment of the project, with the 70% of the portion of the entire investment, which is roughly about 7 billion rands, being done by the concessionaire partner. Not what the other partner that we're working there with, the Infrastructure South Africa, which is providing or is yet to provide a lot of the project preparation support. And we've said those projects are also designated as SIPs, which is work we're doing with Infrastructure South Africa. We're also working with the Department of Mineral Resources and Energy. We have a platform, or a working group with them, which is called the 6 gigawatt working group, to ensure that we're able to bring in the 6,000 megawatts, which is really dependent on the LNG terminals coming into fruition. We're also working with the Independent Power Producer Office, which is the one that drives the procurement of the gas to power, which is really buying off the molecule itself, so that we are closing all the loops of the market being there, but also to respond to the project. So, because without those, there's just no project. And of course, in the Port of Ngqura, we are working with the concessionaire, or rather say the partner that will deliver the terminal aspect, while we deliver the port infrastructure part. Is the Strategic Fuel Fund, which is a subsidiary of the state-owned Central Energy Fund. Strategic Fuel Fund, they're working with Tamasa. And of course, we are working with the Infrastructure South Africa, providing a chunk of the funding for the project preparation support, your pre-feasibility studies, your feasibility studies, and a whole lot of unlocking the environmental aspects of the projects. And we've since even gone out on the market with them. And we also have the support of the Industrial Development Corporation in the port of Ngqura LNG terminal, which is really supporting giving a lot of the administrative support around the funds financing disbursement on the project, and also around the procurement on the project, and a lot of guidance and advisory on the project. Thank you, Spare.
Well, Tando, I think you've touched on some critical aspects that, when combined, are really a good story to tell. You touched on cost efficiency of energy, you touched on job creation, you touched on economic growth. But I want us to also just zone in on some of the concerns that have been brought up around such initiatives when it comes to their impact on the environment. Can you just take us into confidence about some of the measures that are being implemented to ensure that there's minimal impact on the environment when it comes to the LNG projects / operations?
Thanks. You will remember that when we started in the beginning, we classified LNG in itself as a cleaner fossil fuel, which we have said the combustion of LNG to produce energy has less effect or has less global warming emissions than your coal. That's a first. So it's a much more environmentally friendly fossil fuel in itself. And we did mention that it emits at least 50 of between 40 to 60% less carbon emissions. Of course, depending on the power plant or the equipment or the technology that you use for producing that gas to power plant, and the age of that particular technology. But it emits up to 60% less carbon emissions. So in itself, it is cleaner fuel. So it is already telling you of the confidence around environmental impact, right? That's the first. The second one is, of course, for any project, whether it can be clean and renewable, whether you're talking about your renewable energy, your green hydrogen, your wind turbines, they have to go through environmental impact assessment. And that is no different to LNG. It is not done an environmental impact assessment because it is dirty, but it is because it is going to be a new infrastructure development that would have impact on the environment, whether it's birds, whether it's the excavation and so forth, whether it's flora and fauna, the plants and so forth, because you're going to be clearing out a lot of vegetation. So it's really trying to understand what is the specialist studies that must be done to ensure that there is a safer environmental impact from the projects. So what we are doing as the Transnet National Ports Authority, we are ensuring that we have a really thorough environmental impact assessment process. Now, for the Port of Richards Bay, we've already appointed a consultant and environmental assessment practitioner to conduct the environmental impact assessment. And CES is doing that work for us. It is quite advanced, with some specialist studies and preliminary reports already being produced. We've also had public participation engagements around the environmental impact of that project in the Port of Richards Bay. So that is to ensure that there is minimal environmental impact from the infrastructure development of the project. In the Port of Ngqura, We are also out in the market to appoint an environmental assessment practitioner for the LNG terminal in the port of Ngqura up to the port boundary. The same with Richards Bay up to the port boundary. And we are going to be appointing at least by the end of November and to start that environmental impact assessment. And as I have mentioned, that these two projects are strategic integrated projects, which really are to ensure that we are able to get the regulatory support even more so from the environmental aspect of regulation. What is also important to note is that the project or the LNG terminals themselves are not in isolation. So there's work that will happen that will have environmental impact within the port boundary. But then there's work that happens outside because you must pipe the gas from your terminal at your berth to the power station or to an industrial gas user. So the pipelines will be running beyond the port boundary. Of course, that again has an environmental impact. The question is then what then happens outside the port boundary? Now, the partners that we're working with on the project, we've ensured that, and we're aligning with them and we sit in structures with them to ensure that there's also environmental impact, environmental assessments that are done outside the port boundary to the end user of that gas. So they've already appointed as well service providers to ensure that work happens. In the port of Ngqura, for instance, this Ngqura Special Economic Zone is making sure that they've gone out to the market to procure services of an environmental assessment practitioner to do the EIA from the port boundary to the power station and the power station itself. Because if that power station does not get environmental authorization, the terminal itself cannot sell the molecule to that power station. So we have a structure to make sure that that happens. And then even in the port of Richards Bay, Eskom itself that is already having advanced work on the gas to power, and the IPPs are doing, will be doing and are doing, and have environmental authorizations, in fact, of the power stations, but also the pipeline from the port boundary in the port of Richards Bay to the Lily pipeline and so forth. Our partners, our concessionaires are doing the environmental impact assessment or environmental assessment studies to ensure that there is a seamless approval of the environmental authorizations. Thank you, Spe.
I know that you have previously touched on some of our strategic partnerships. Would you like to add anything about the role of these strategic partnerships to TNPA for some of the projects expansively that are being done?
Thank you, Spe. So you'd remember that I mentioned that within our energy pillar, one of the key things that have been raised by the International Maritime Organization is around the fuel that is used in our vessels, in our tugs, and hence there is a move of a net zero by 2050. By the way, Transnet themselves, we also have a target of net zero by 2040, 2050, that we have to have transitioned our marine fleet, our cranes, our hull trucks. We should have had a move towards cleaner fuels. And that really talks to our transportation aspect or delivering freight reliable as Transnet. So we've got several partners in that work of transitioning to cleaner fuels. I'll just mention a few that we have gone out to the market on hydrogen, green hydrogen. And we've received feedback from the market when we went out for requests for information. And we're looking at two things: the commercial exportation or export of green hydrogen, but also the domestic use of hydrogen in our fleet. Now, the commercial export of our green hydrogen has really received interest, and we're looking at really starting pre-feasibility work to set up these hydrogen terminals in related ports, particularly the port of Saldanha. That's why we're looking at having a lot of the anchor of your green hydrogen. We are looking at the port of Ngqura, where we already have work that is being done by a number of entities, and a whole lot of other ports to look at storage of hydrogen. And the partners that we're working there with is your Western Cape Growth Development Agencies, WestGrow. We're looking at feasibility studies in partnership with them to ensure that we've got the relevant infrastructure. We're looking at feasibility studies of a pipeline that connects our Western Cape ports, your port of Cape Town or your port of Saldanha, to Namibia and then to the European market, because that's where your biggest market sits around Europe. So we're looking at pre-feasibility studies with our partners, your WestGrow and your Ngqura, the Northern Cape Economic Development Agency, and with the advent of the new port, the Bogobai port, to use that route toward the NAM port towards Europe, of a pipeline that can export your green hydrogen to the European markets. That's more on the commercial side. Now, on the domestic side, we're looking at pilots of converting, of using hydrogen fuel cells in our tanks. We're looking at sustainable aviation fuels for our helicopters. And of course, that's work that is being done by the Sugar Association, of looking at biofuels for our sustainable, or for our aircraft, looking at sustainable aviation fuels. Of course, we're also looking at biofuels for our tanks, and of course looking at ammonia, green ammonia for bunkering for our vessels. Now, this has been done a lot in other ports. The port of Rotterdam has got pilots on this. So we've got a number of global ports that we're learning from, and we're starting partnerships with the port of Antwerp Brooks. We're doing work, starting conversations and starting some work with them around greening alternative fuels for our tanks. And of course, it is a lot of work as well we are doing with other finance institutions that have shown interest in our work, and that is work that is early stages. And it must be interesting. It's very important to mention as well, Spare, that in our water projects or our water space, we're entering into partnerships with the automotive sector, which have come to us as the TNP to say, look, for your desalination program and your water projects, we as the auto sector are struggling to get premium water. Premium water is because the current wastewater treatment plants, the water quality is not good, so you can't use it for spraying the cars and painting. So they've approached us to say, we want to buy off your desalination plants premium water, and these are customers that are within the ports and are within our port terminal operator land space, that want us to support them from a utility space. So we've signed some non-disclosure agreements, are looking at agreements with some of our auto entities, primarily in the Port of East London. We already signed an NDA with Mercedes-Benz, looking at supplying them with that premium water, because they are one of our anchor tenants, and then it helps to keep that business within the Eastern Cape. Of course, we are looking at working with the Automotive Industry Development Corporation to look at electric vehicle charging stations, which will assist the importing of more electric vehicles through your port of Durban, through your port of PE, through your port of East London, because now the ports can look at putting up electric vehicle charging stations to receive these imported EV stations, and therefore make our country and our ports quite conducive to receive more volumes and grow our cargo in the auto space, because we're now bringing in the utility of electric vehicle charging stations, of course, with the renewable energy work that we're doing. Of course, we do a lot of work with the municipalities, because they are regulators, to ensure that we do good work, and a whole lot of other partners that I might not have mentioned, because the work we're doing in parallel to ensure we execute the projects, but we also bring in the partners as we seamlessly provide sustainable utilities to ensure a deliverance of freight reliable. Thank you, Spen.
Thanks, Sando. I think it's incredibly encouraging to know that we are compliant in terms of our environmental legislation, and that our EIA process is rigorous. This has been an incredibly enriching conversation. Thank you so much, Sandokazi, for joining us. We have come to the end. I believe that our audience also has a salient appreciation of what utilities development does, not just for Transnet, but for South Africa. And a special thank you to you and your team for the role that you play in strengthening and providing innovative solutions for the growth of our economy. Till the next episode, stay tuned to Lentswe, the voice of Transnet.